inspiring to me. It is Am Yisrael at that time that gave me strength to go on, and that is why I feel it is my duty to continue to speak, first so that no one forgets my son, Nachshon, Hashem Yikom Damo, and second, because I think it is important to share the strength that was given to me by my people, the love, the caring, the compassion I was given at that time, to share that with my people again. I will begin, or it doesn't really matter where I begin, the story will unfold. My name is Esther Waxman. I was born in a DP camp in Germany in 1947. My parents, survivors of the Holocaust, survivors of Auschwitz, moved to America in 1950 when I was a baby. I was not yet 3. And I grew up in the United States, very much like you. Went to school, went to parties, listened to music, went to college. But I was a child in a family whose entire family had perished in the ovens of Nazi Germany. I grew up as a child of survivors, but became a true American, the word is there, Jap, a Jewish American princess. But a sort of cloud of depression, of sadness, a sort of melancholy hung over our home. And as a typical second-generation child of survivors, I knew, without being told, that I was my parents' reason for existence. I was the new hope. I was the optimism, the reason for their being, for building out of ashes a new family. Their hope, their future, all their expectations were wrapped up in me. I knew, without having been told, as I said, that I had to be the smartest, the prettiest, the most popular, the most obedient of children. That is a very, very tough burden for a little girl, a young woman, and later a mother, a wife and mother, to have to bear. For I took that demand or expectation for excellence with me as a mother and probably passed it to my children. So they're third generation. And as Rav Bina told you, there is no existence for me without the Holocaust having influenced my life, even though I was not born yet when it occurred. It's sort of like you must see yourself as if you exited Egypt. That is a command. The command to remember is a constant theme of our Jewish sources. Remember the creation, remember the Sabbath, remember Amalek, remember the destruction on the happiest day of your life, your wedding day. You will break that glass to remember the destruction of the temple. Tisha B'Av. Holocaust Day, a remembrance day for a third of our people who were wiped out, annihilated by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. And today, the eve of Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day for our fallen soldiers. I didn't think that I would be in this position again. Sort of skipped my generation. Parents had suffered. I grew up, as I told you, real Jap. Decided to move to Israel because as an observant Jew, when I davened and said words like Uvenei Yerushalayim, Rachem al Tzion, Hashivenu Elokim Tzion Irecha, all these words, it suddenly clicked one day that I was only a plane ticket away from fulfilling all that. And so I came, and I stayed. I came after graduating college, stayed at the Hebrew University for my master's degree, met my husband, and we had 7 sons. I was going to be part of the history of this Alt Neuland, this old, new country, and I was very excited about it. I knew this was the only place where I wanted to raise my family. And so, our sons, may they live and be well, were raised on a threefold love. The love of Torah, the love of their people, and the love of their land. I taught at the Hebrew University High School for 28 years. And as I told you I was, my sons grew up pretty much the way any normal teenagers do. They too were members of youth movements. Favorite thing to do was to travel in this country. Walk the length and breadth of this country. Hike, climb, rattle, snapple, whatever they did. My 2 oldest sons were drafted into the Golani Brigade. My 3rd son was Nachshon. And as a 3rd son, he sort of had to outdo his 2 older brothers. And so he volunteered for an elite commando unit of the Golani called Orev Golani. His brothers sort of laughed at him at the time because he wasn't as tall, big, strapping as the other fellows in the Orev Golani. He was more slight, perhaps a head shorter. But, as we all know, when there's a will, there is a way. And he made it into that unit, and he became the pride of his brothers, certainly, and of all of us. My older sons, the 2 above Nachshon, were named for ancestors, grandparents, who had not survived. My parents, who lived in America, came to the Brit and told us the names. My 3rd son, we chose the name. First one. He was born on Isru Chag Pesach, where we had read just the day before of the splitting of the Red Sea, where God promised the children of Israel that the water would turn into dry land. Who was the first to jump in as a true man of faith and belief in God? Nachshon ben Aminadav, the president of the tribe of Yehuda. At that same period of time in modern Jewish history, Operation Nachshon took place in 1948, and that was the operation that opened the road to Jerusalem. And so we felt that all our values, everything we had tried to imbue in our children, was or existed in that name, Nachshon. Pure faith and belief in God, a love of his people, a love of his land. And he did us proud. As a soldier, he served 2 stints in Lebanon, 4 months each. There were no cell phones at that time, and we did not hear from our son for months. The second time, after 4 months in Lebanon, he came home on Friday, just before Shabbat, for a week's leave. On Motzei Shabbat, he got a call from the army saying that he and another soldier in his unit had been chosen to take a course on Sunday, a one-day course where he would be given a license to operate a certain army vehicle necessary for the Golani Brigade. It was a very, very prestigious offer, and he and his friend, who lived in the center of Israel, in this town called Yahud, Nachshon was driven to his friend's house late Saturday night after having been at a friend's engagement party. And early Sunday morning, they left to go up north to the army base where he was going to take this course. He parted from us, Motzei Shabbat, with the words, Shavua Tov, Litraot Machar Balayla. I will see you tomorrow night, Be'ezrat Hashem. Nachshon did not come home on Sunday night. Perhaps because of my background, with overprotective parents, my children knew that if there were a change in plans, a delay, they called their mother. When we did not hear from our son by midnight Sunday night, we phoned the military authorities, Ktina Ir in Yerushalayim. We were referred to the military police up north, who referred us to the military police in the center, who referred us to the military police of Jerusalem. We were not taken very seriously. A boy of 19 who tells his mother, I'll be back tomorrow night. So it's midnight, so he's not back yet. You're a typical Jewish mother. But by Monday, when I had not heard from my son and he had not come home, by Monday, to me, he did not call because he could not call. I had no other thought other than that my son was dead. On Tuesday afternoon, we got a phone call from Israel Television. They told us that they were coming to our home, and please remember that nobody knew there was a missing soldier. Only our family was aware that our son had not returned. This was not common knowledge. The television station told us that they were coming directly to our house with a videotape they had been given by a Reuters photographer in Gaza. They came to our home with a tape, and on the tape you see Nachshon sitting on a chair like this, bound hand and foot, a terrorist with a red and white keffiyeh wrapped around his face, holding a gun to his temple, prodding him to speak. Nachshon said, I am addressing Prime Minister Rabin. I have been kidnapped and I'm being held hostage by Hamas terrorists. We have a boy like that right now. I'm sure you're all aware of Gilad Shalit's predicament. As a matter of fact, at this hour, I had committed to be at the Kiryah, at the Rosh HaMemshala's office, where there was a march for him today, not to forget this boy on this day. But I made a commitment to be here and tell you my story. Prime Minister Rabin, their demands are that their spiritual leader, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, be released from an Israeli prison, and likewise 200 other terrorists being held in Israeli prisons. If you do not meet their demands, on Friday at 8 p.m., they will execute me. This is the first time any such scenario had occurred in Israel. soldiers had been kidnapped and killed before. Some of them were friends of Nachshon. 2 were from my neighborhood. Arik Frankenthal, Yaron Chen. 1 was in Lebanon, boy from my neighborhood. When Golani left Lebanon, they made way for Tzanchanim, the paratroopers. The paratroopers who took over from Golani, one of them was one of Nachshon's good friends from the neighborhood, and he was on a hilltop up in the Golan, in Syria, Lebanon, pointing things out to him, when his friend, who was standing right beside him, got a direct missile hit. Died right then and there. And Nachshon, who had been a medic as well, he was a graduate of the Magen David Adom course, could not save him. He came home at that point, he was devastated over his friend. This was the first stint in Lebanon. And he asked us, his name was El Grabli, Yehuda, this is his father. El Grabli. He asked us then, Udi El Grabli, how do I go to his parents? What do I tell them? I couldn't save his life. He was standing right next to me. How do I go there? What do I say? I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't envy him. It was terrible. And then he bought it a few months later. We watched the video. All of Israel and the world saw that video. It was broadcast throughout the world. I'm sure your parents remember it. And though everyone was horrified and agonized, I, on the other hand, was somewhat relieved. Very strange sensation. Because there he was. He was alive. We could maybe save him. Yitzhak Rabin would release these terrorists and we would get Nachshon back, right? To me, he'd been dead, and now he's alive. Had very mixed feelings. We spent those next 4 days, 24 hours around the clock, doing everything in our power to help our son. Experts in Mideast affairs came to our home. People who knew Islam and people who knew Islamic leaders phoned these leaders in countries which Israel has no contact with, has no relations with. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. They got to these spiritual leaders of Islam, and everyone told these terrorists not to harm our son. Indeed, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, whose release they were demanding, got on the media and said, do not harm the soldier. Yasser Arafat phoned my home. Because when they got this videotape from Gaza, Yitzhak Rabin got on the air and said, Yasser Arafat, it is your responsibility to bring this soldier home safely. Because he was in charge of Gaza at that time. And I got on television immediately after Rabin. I didn't have to go anywhere. I just had to open the front door. The whole press of the world was right at my stairs. And I said, I want you to know that my son is wearing the uniform of the IDF, of Tzahal. We are citizens of Israel. Nobody but you, Mr. Rabin, is responsible for my son. Certainly not Yasser Arafat. And let me also tell you that on that Friday, the day of the ultimatum, where they were going to kill him that night, that morning, Friday morning, the news broadcasts announced that Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat were to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. I believe that is probably why Arafat called our home and said he would leave no stone unturned if indeed my son were in Gaza, to return him home. Yitzhak Rabin said, I don't need a Nobel Peace Prize, I want that soldier. And Shimon Peres said, that is the price we pay for peace. Different reactions by different leaders. Just food for thought. Yitzhak Rabin, by the way, again, just food for thought, was assassinated 1 year to the day of my son's funeral. My son was killed on Yud Cheshvan that Friday night, but not assassinated as the terrorists threatened. I will get to that story. And on that Motzei Shabbat, 1 year later, Yud Aleph Cheshvan, that night, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. We had been in touch with him all year. He was in my home, he called us. All right, Thursday night, all right, besides the Islamic leaders of the world, all the major countries in the world were called. I phoned Bill Clinton. I announced Nachshon's American citizenship, which he had through me, though he had never even been in the United States. Bill Clinton sent the Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, to this area, and he went back and forth from Gaza to Jerusalem to bring us news of which there was none. The chief rabbi of Israel, both chief rabbis, were in our home. The Sephardi chief rabbi flew to Paris to speak to Mitterrand. His name was Rav Bakshi Doron. His French was fluent, and Mitterrand was a known friend of the Arab nations. He thought he might help. The Ashkenazi chief rabbi was Rav Lau. He is the one who, from my home, phoned the media and asked everybody in Israel, in the world, and especially school children, to please say 3 chapters of Tehillim a day. 3 prakim for Nachshon. I remember we got a phone call right after he announced that on the news. From the chief of police was in my home as well. And his wife called him and asked to please make sure he brought home that book that the chief rabbi had just said to please say 3 chapters from. And so it was with the secular school system, the Mamlachti school system. The Board of Education provided Sifrei Tehillim to that entire sector of education. And everybody said these 3 chapters of Tehillim. People on buses, I was told, everyone had Tehillim on them. On Thursday night, there was a prayer vigil at the Kotel right here. There were about 100,000 people there. Left, right, Ashkenazis, Sephardi, rich, poor, ministers in the government and truck drivers who came. A prayer vigil for Nachshon. And at that very same hour, around the world, prayer vigils were held, according to local time, that hour, in schools, in shuls, in Hillel houses, on campuses, in universities. I have received over 50,000 letters. I received them at that time. Remember, President Weitzman's office took care of all that mail. His staff collated those letters into children, adults, American, Israeli, French, and so on. They did all that for us, and we later answered all those letters. Thursday night, the prayer vigil. And Friday morning, Rabin, besides being Prime Minister, was also Minister of Defense. His Assistant Minister of Defense was Mota Gur, who later that year committed suicide. He was in our home Friday morning, and my husband said, I'm going out to the press right now, and I'm telling them that you will negotiate. Rabin had said, under no circumstances will I negotiate with terrorists. I will never yield to blackmail, and that is my final word. Yuda, my husband, said, I'm going out right now to tell the press that you will negotiate. Let him call me a liar. Montagor stopped him from doing that. He told him that there were underground discussions and that things were moving and so on and so forth. He was lying. Doesn't matter now. We did not know that on Thursday, while we were praying, we did not know that Israel had captured one of the terrorists. They had found the driver of the car, who was a resident of East Jerusalem. Therefore, the car, I'll tell you what I mean by the car in a moment, had Israeli license plates, and the terrorist from East Jerusalem spoke fluent Hebrew. When they finished that course up north, and we got the information that they had been at the course, I called the friend who went with him. That's on the Monday when I was making all the phone calls. I knew they had finished the course, and I know that his friend had dropped him off near where he lived in Yahud, as I said before, at a huge junction called Tzomet Bnei Atalot, about 3 kilometers from Ben Gurion Airport. Not in the territories, not over the Green Line, not in the settlements, wherever you want to think that terrorists might operate, but in the center of Israel. At that time, never since, soldiers hitchhiked. Always. Since my son was kidnapped, the first thing that happens when you are inducted into the Israeli army is that you are shown a film and warned not to hitchhike. Nachshon state. And if you are caught hitchhiking by the military police, you will be arrested on the spot. Nachshon got into a car that stopped for him. A car with 3 men in it, wearing big black kippot, tzitzit to their knees, Hasidic music on the tape deck, a Bible and a siddur on the dashboard. He got into that car and was never seen again. We were told all of this much, much later. As I said, on Thursday, at our prayer vigil here at the hotel, we did not know this was happening. We did not know that this terrorist had been captured. We did not know that he had been picked up in that car. And we did not know what they found out, our intelligence, where he had been taken, and it was not Gaza, and it was not under Yasser Arafat's jurisdiction. It was to a village called Bir Nabala, under Israeli rule, located approximately 10 minutes from my home in Ramot. As I said, we did not know any of this on Thursday or on Friday, when my husband said he was to tell the media that they would negotiate in order to buy time. Even if Rabin was not prepared to do anything, that was what my husband wanted to do. Montagor did not let him. Excuse me. And Friday night, when I lit candles, I opened the door again. And I invited the press into my house. They all came in, and I asked, as I was lighting my Shabbat candles, I asked women around the world to please light an extra candle that night for my son, because nobody was looking for Netiv MrsWachsman. My son could have been your son, your brother, your friend, anybody. And so light a candle for him. As we sat at our Shabbat table, my eyes were glued to the door, and I was so certain, so very certain, that Nachshon was going to walk in any minute. How could it be otherwise? Instead, as Rav Bina told you, General Yoram Yair walked through the door. He was known as Yaya. You know, Israelis like these nicknames. Bibi, Yaya, and so forth. As soon as we saw him, we knew what news he was bringing. The messenger of death. Took us into a private room in our home. My sons had gone back to shul to say more Tehillim, as did most of the population of Israel that night. Went back to their shuls and just waited, saying Tehillim. They were called home, and he told us what had happened. Prime Minister Rabin had made a solo decision to send in the most elite unit of the IDF, Sayeret Matkal. Those are the people who bombed or went into Entebbe, the Savoy Hotel, many of the terrorist situations in the history of our country. We'll say a few words about history in a moment. He told us that Sayeret Matkal was going to make a military rescue attempt to save my son. Saving one hostage in a one hostage situation, saving that hostage is almost impossible. And indeed, everything that could go wrong that night in that military attempt went wrong. The door didn't open properly. They didn't know exactly which room they were holding Nachshon in, although they were informed by this informer, but it didn't go quite as they hoped. They opened fire. First person killed was the captain of Sayeret Matkal, Captain Nir Poraz. All these boys who went in, dozens of them, did not know Nachshon, were willing to risk their lives to save this soldier. Maybe all our prayers saved all their lives. Their captain, Nir Poraz, was killed. The others all survived with wounds. After our shiva, we went to see all those soldiers who had been wounded in the attempt to save my child's life. We got all this information from Yaya. He told us about the storming of the house. He told us that once they were revealed, the soldiers shouted out, "We will leave here. You can go free. Just give us the soldier." And at that very moment, a shot was heard, and the terrorist shouted out, "I've just killed your soldier." Of course, our boys killed all the terrorists. The informer, driver of the car, the East Jerusalem resident, is serving a life sentence in prison. And I must tell you that under the pressure of a great, great, great dilemma, where I differed from my whole family, I asked Ehud Olmert, when he was Prime Minister of Israel, I said that if freeing that terrorist serving a life sentence for killing my son would in any way free Gilad Shalit, do it. Free him. That was not a popular decision, and it was a decision made not from the head as a good citizen, but in the heart as a mother. That boy had to come home to his mother. I could not bear the situation of his having been 3.5 years under Hamas, or what had happened to this boy. But my terrorist is still serving his sentence, and Gilad Shalit is still serving his. spent Shabbat knowing our son was dead, waiting for the funeral on Motzei Shabbat. The same microcosm of Israeli society, religious and secular, Hasidim with black frock coats and long tzitzit and big black hats, side by side with my students at the Hebrew University High School in torn jeans, earrings, and ponytails. The boys' names. Swaying and praying and crying side by side at the Kotel, and then side by side at Mount Herzl. Half of those people probably had never been at the Kotel, and the other half certainly had never been in a military funeral in Mount Herzl. Before he buried his son, my husband's concern was with those Jews who had never prayed and who did so for my son, those women who did not light Shabbat candles, who did so for my son. He was concerned about a crisis in faith. And so he asked Shon's Rosh Yeshiva at the Hesped, when he gave the eulogy, to please tell everyone who thought God did not answer prayers, did not listen to prayers, he asked the Rosh Yeshiva to say in his name that he had prayed to God for many, many things over the course of his life. For a family, for a wife, for children, for parnasa, for a good home, for everything. And he was answered. And the answer was yes. And that his children, all of you, who ask parents for something, we would always like to say yes to our children. But sometimes we have to say no. And the child does not understand why. And we, the children of our Father in heaven, Avinu Shebashamayim, were answered. And the answer was no. And no is an answer that we must accept and come to terms with. Tziduk Hadin. I speak to you now, and I always remember to quote the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Kook Zatzal, who said, I do not speak because I have the strength to speak. I speak because I do not have the strength to remain silent. And that is why I speak, gentlemen. I do not have the strength to remain silent. I must include you all, my brothers, my sisters, all of the children in Israel, wherever they are, who were there for me. I want you to remember. I want you to fulfill that mitzvah of remembering and of knowing that this could have been anyone, that my child was your brother, that we are all links in the chain of Jewish history. The same Rav Kook wrote the word history, which has no Hebrew word. You study historia. The only Hebrew word is zachor. When you are told about events in our past, zachor. But historia, Rav Kook used to write with a taf, whereas most of us write it with a tet. And he attributed that to the root of the word historia, which, can you figure it out? Setel. Samach Taf Resh. God's realm is hidden from us. It was hidden from the man closest to him, Moshe Rabbeinu, who asked to see his face, and who was told, Lo yireni ha'adayim v'chai. Man, no mere mortal can see me and live. See me meaning understand my ways, know how I run the universe. And so the answer was no. I don't understand, and nobody understands, and there are many things I don't understand. But as I said, we are all links in the chain of Jewish history. And I'd like you to continue to be my partners in that chain, to continue to remember your roots, to continue to love your heritage, your people, your country. And may we all be privileged, as I feel privileged to be here in Jerusalem, to live here, to have brought up my sons here. Let us all be privileged to welcome Mashiach and the redemption. Amen. Any questions?
I want you to speak about how Nachshon, what kind of person he was in the law.
Very valid question. Nachshon was everybody's best friend. You talk to any of the kids who went to school with him, who were in the youth movement of Ezra with him, or who were in the army with him, and each one of them will tell you he was my best friend. Every one of them. Nachshon did not know how to be sad. He always smoothed over disputes. He always smiled. I told you he had finished the MADA course. He was a licensed medic. He was both a member of the youth movement of Ezra and a counselor in that movement. He loved Tiyulim. He was the third of 7 sons and the most loving brother of them all to his youngest brother, who is a disabled child. That was Nachshon. Let's see if I have something here that I haven't said, but I believe there is one perhaps way that I'd like to end this talk. David HaMelech in Tehillim says in one of the psukim, Keli, Keli, lama azaftani. O Lord, why have you forsaken me? And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Zatzal, makes a comment on this particular pasuk. He says, what kind of question is that? Is David HaMelech really questioning God? Does he really expect an answer? Is this a valid question? Why have you forsaken me? Has God forsaken him? And isn't it a bit chutzpah to ask God such a question? And of course he's not going to get any kind of answer. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says, do not read lama azaftani, read lima azaftani. Meaning not why, but for what purpose? What am I supposed to do now? I don't know what Rav Bina had in mind, but that is the question that I then asked myself, as did all the members of our family. What are we supposed to do with this? It can't just have happened for no good reason and then be forgotten. And so I made it my mission to speak everywhere I'm asked to, so that people of your generation, and then your friends, and then Hala, will remember Nachshon. And so I talk about him. I very often talk about disabled children, those who are different, and how society has an obligation to them, but that is not my speech today. Today is Leil Yom HaZikaron, and I think I've said what has to be said. Lema. For what purpose? What must I do now with what I remember, with what has happened? Thank you.